Good morning, Sprigeo. September 14th, a nice early morning for myself. And welcome back to the Heroes Project. Anyways, today we have the honor of having Weddle, Professor Daniel Weddle, who's at the UMKC School of Law. He joined there in 1996 and serves as Director of Academic Support. A former high school teacher and administrator, Weddle has focused his research on issues in education law, especially those concerning violence and bullying in schools. In 1999, Professor Weddle took a leave from the law school to serve as interim dean of operations for the UMKC School of Education. While there, he worked closely with the Kansas City, Missouri School District in a pilot project placing seniors from the School of Education in the KCMSD schools as full-time teachers with faculty mentors. Professor Weddle graduated from the University of Kansas School of Law in 1995, serving as the editor-in-chief of the Law Review's Criminal Procedure Review. Prior to joining the law school, he practiced with the Working Group PC in Kansas City, where he specialized in business, family law, and tort litigation. Prior to beginning his legal career, Weddle served as academic dean and English instructor at Maranatha Academy in Kansas City for 12 years. Anyways, Professor Weddle, it's a pleasure having you on with us at Sprigeo. So, if you could take it up from there and tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you're involved in.
Well, because of my education background as an administrator and as a teacher, I had a natural interest in education law. In fact, that's actually why I went to law school in the first place. Took an education law course and was fascinated. So when I began writing as a professor, that was kind of a natural place to go. And then I became interested in the bullying issue and began to write about that about 7, 8 years ago, something like that.
Fantastic. So could you tell us a little bit more about what specifically you've researched and what you've done in regards to bullying?
Well, the first thing I started looking at was the research that has been done over the last 30 years or so, beginning with Dan Olveus' research in Norway. I was surprised to find that we know quite a lot about bullying and bullying prevention, but that it's not happening in schools. And my first article really was about that kind of disconnect between what we know about bullying and what the law requires schools to do. And I've been writing on variations on that theme for some time now. What we should be doing legally, and what schools should be doing as a result.
All right. Now, going along those lines, schools are mainly focused on bullying that occurs within campus, but we know that a lot of, or if not the majority of bullying actually takes place outside of campus. So what are the implications of that?
Well, it creates a really difficult problem for schools on a legal front, because the First Amendment gives schools a certain amount of authority over student speech, but that law really has developed in the context of an actual schoolhouse gate. The famous line from the Tinker case in 1969, that students do not shed their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gate, but that they are not coextensive with the rights of adults once they're in school, because the school has special characteristics. Teachers and administrators need to take care of other students, things need to be taught, etc. That was fine until the internet came along, and it became more of an issue because the gate has become virtual at this point, and students can sit in their bedrooms and reach into the school environment and savage each other from their bedrooms. And the question then becomes, does the school have any authority over that speech, which did not occur on campus, and perhaps was not even intended to reach campus, but because it's on the internet, of course, it's always accessible, and as soon as kids find out something fun on the internet, they bring it to school, and off they go. So it's created a problem for courts, because courts have had a hard time figuring out when schools should have some kind of authority over off-campus speech, and when they shouldn't, because while it sounds simple enough to say, well, if they're bullying kids at school, the schools ought to be able to do something about it. The problem with that is that from a First Amendment perspective, it suddenly gives a state agency infinite authority over the speech of the students enrolled in the school. It converts. A good way to think about it is outside of school, the child has full speech rights. In school, his speech becomes student speech. So the question is whether it's this private speech or is it student speech. And if everything becomes student speech simply because a child's enrolled in school, then we've just given a state agency a gigantic amount of authority over speech.
Yeah, absolutely. And I absolutely agree in regards to that very fine line between, what's the difference? So the student goes outside of the campus, but nonetheless, they still have so much influence over what's going on in the campus, yet, where do you curb the authority of the school itself in regards to what the student can and can't be doing outside of the campus? So in regards to that, what would be that fine line? What would be somewhat of a solution to that?
Well, I think we ought to look at it this way. We don't want schools to have infinite authority over children's speech outside of the school environment. On the other hand, schools should not have to sit idly by while a child deliberately re-enters the school environment from the internet to savage other students. So I think I would suggest a nexus test, that there has to be a nexus between the speech and the school, and that nexus has to be fairly narrow, I would say. Mm-hmm. We might have a series of factors, for example, kind of simple factors that an administrator can follow. Is there evidence that the child intended the speech to reach the school? Evidence that he took probably affirmative steps versus taking affirmative steps to keep it from reaching the school? Is the child targeting identifiable students or groups of students? And is he intending to cause some kind of harm or injury in that bullying sense? At that point, I think it's fair to say that the child has basically walked back into the school environment from a virtual standpoint. And when that happens, I think schools ought to have the authority to discipline that speech as student speech.
Right, that makes sense. That's perfect. Now, also, in regards to what the student is writing and what a school can be doing, so what would be the disciplinary actions that a school would take against a student that turns out that they are purposefully writing or reaching in within the campus and attempting to hurt another person?
Well, I think any reasonable disciplinary action is on the table at that point, because anything from some sort of detention, whatever, up to suspension or expulsion, depending on the severity of the act. I think once the child has submitted himself deliberately to the school's authority, the school ought to be able to use its authority as it would on any Monday morning.
Okay. And also, in regards to that, we're talking about only the situations in which the school would become aware of it, because the student who is being bullied would actually go into the administration and say that, such and such is happening, I'm really not appreciating it, and then actions can be taken to prevent that or against it. But what about all the other noise, all the other social networking, everything else that is going on, and the majority of students that frankly don't go over to the administration and say that, look, such and such is happening, such and such is bullying me. What about those students? How would you control that?
Well, I think that you just pointed out the basic flaw in a pure disciplinary approach. The reason bullying flourishes in a school is because there's a culture that keeps it underground. In other words, the bullies are smart enough typically not to do what they're doing in front of administrators or teachers or anyone else who has the power to stop it. In fact, they tend to be really good at staying off the radar screen, deflecting blame, and avoiding getting caught. What you have to do, really, is to change the culture of the school. You have to create a culture in which everyone in the school community, from cafeteria workers and maintenance folks and bus drivers to the superintendent and the parents and the students, all decide that bullying is going to stop and that it's something that, in effect, we don't do that here. And when we see it, we will report it and we will stand up as witnesses. In other words, we ought to quit thinking of bystanders and we ought to be thinking of witnesses. And they ought to think of themselves as witnesses to abuse, and that they should they should go to someone and say, Susie is bullying Janice, and somebody needs to put a stop to what Susie's doing. Those kinds of approaches tend to work. If you can rally the entire school community to develop that consensus, then it takes care of bullying both on campus and off campus, because once a child begins to bully online, he's not going to do it probably in a way that others don't get to see it and will laugh at it and join in. And so as soon as other students begin to see it happening, they should stand up and go to an administrator or teacher and say, this is what's going on, needs to stop. And then there should be an intervention that both addresses the target and protects the target, but then also addresses the bullying and makes a strong and concerted effort to turn the bullying around.
Absolutely. And in regards to actually heading over to the administrator, that's what we at Sprigeo really try to do, is that we try to make that accessible to the students at any single point in time. So a lot of students, one of the main fears that they have about reporting a bullying incident is actually going to the administrator and telling them about it. And in many case scenarios, when they actually tell the administrator physically, then someone else may see it goes along the grapevine, and the bully themselves figures that out and just tends to exacerbate the problem itself. So at Sprigeo, we created that system that actually allows them to report it at any place, any point in time, at their own convenience. And it really creates an awesome tool for students to really mitigate bullying. But once again, it returns back to, in order for bullying to truly be mitigated within a school, within that environment, is that the culture has to change. And it's not only the way that the students think, it's not only the way that the schools think, but it also reaches outside of the school limits, and reaches into the households, reaches into the community, and makes sure that it's a complete effort by everyone to really change the culture and to allow students and everyone else to think differently, so that when they do see something happening, they actually take action against it. So instead of being reactive, we have to switch it to a proactive community.
I agree with that completely, and I'm impressed with the reporting system that you all have created, because I do think it gets at a huge problem. But as you say, the real issue ultimately has to be the school community has to have a different ethic. And, really, in any group of people, once you get a critical mass, you're going to have bullies. You're going to have people willing to bully. It's a percentage of the population that will do that. What makes bullying work is complicity by those of us who don't want to bully and don't like bullying and don't think it ought to happen, but we're too afraid, we're too shy, or not, or too ignorant in the sense of not really knowing exactly what we should do. That complicity is what allows bullies to get away with what they do. As soon as the school community says, we will no longer be complicit, we will actively oppose this, bullying drops dramatically, because the bullies, they lose the incentive, nobody likes it, and they get found out and confronted.
Yeah.
So That is the secret, and it's been an open secret for about 30 years. But we're not really doing that in the schools, and that's been, I think, a tragedy.
Absolutely. So in regards to that, how would a school or a student or a community, how would they go about and actually change the culture? What is that beginning point? Because I know that students want to, they don't know how to. Administration wants to, they don't know how to. The community, the same thing. So what is that starting point?
Well, the best bullying prevention programs tend to have certain things in common, and one of them is that there is some sort of valid assessment of what's going on in the particular school. An anonymous questionnaire, some sort of assessment that shows how many children are being bullied and to what extent. And then that assessment is reported to the school community at large, and along with what we know about bullying and its effects on the targets, on the children who are doing the bullying, and on the people who witness that bullying. And once that's made clear to parents and students and staff, the reaction typically is what you would expect. We're not going to put up with this anymore. The next step typically is to develop a bullying prevention policy, some sort of a bullying policy. And really that's where the trick is to spend a concerted year or so as a community developing the policy, developing the consequences and steps that will be taken in investigations and so on. That's when I think the community changes. And really focusing on it for a year in multiple discussions and so on, I think that's when people then become energized and believe that we together are actually going to change things here. And I think the culture of the school not only changes, I think it perpetuates if the administration leads the charge and maintains it. As new students come in, they find out very quickly that we don't do that here. And they find out this is a different culture and a different ethic, and it's kids themselves have it. And the administrators back them up with that question. The parents back them up. And that little group that always shows up finds itself either having to change or be constantly up against an entire community that's just not going to put up with it.
Yeah, perfect. And after that, anything else you think schools or you'd like to tell schools or administrators or students about bullying, and really any last words?
I would say to the targets, it's not your fault. Bullying is a random thing. Bullies look for somebody, and they seem to have almost a gift for identifying where a person feels vulnerable, whether that vulnerability is even real. But they tend to be able to exploit it fairly quickly and to put the target on the defensive and on his heels, emotionally and sometimes physically. And you need to understand that when you're being targeted by bullies, it's not because there's something wrong with you. It's not because you've done something to deserve it. No one deserves it. So that's the first thing you need to understand. This is not because of you. This is because of someone else who happened to pick you. And it's more of a luck of the draw. So you need to understand. To the other students, you need to understand that standing by and watching somebody be savage is unacceptable. I mean, you have a moral duty. In the same way that a witness to a crime has to go to the police and stand up and be a witness in court, or that person is going to continue to commit that crime. You have to do the same thing. And one of the things you need to realize is that you're actually doing the bully a favor. The studies have shown that students who bully run some very serious risks of trouble later in life. And so you actually do them a favor if they get turned around. Administrators and teachers, you have got to quit believing that you do not have a bullying problem because you don't see it. If you don't see it, you really have one because you're not looking. Those schools that get bullying under control go looking for it. They take deliberate steps, and they find it. And it's not a failure to find it; it's a success because it's going on whether you find it or not. I would say to school administrators, you need to take the lead. You need to get educated on best practices, and you need to insist that they become implemented in your school and in your district. And that goes for private schools, that goes for religious schools, it goes for any educational setting. By the way, this is not limited to K through 12. We have a serious problem in higher education. We know that there's extensive bullying in the adult workplace. We know there's extensive bullying in K through 12. The kids who bully do not go on vacation for 4 years of college and then pick it up again. They're doing it in the dorms. They're doing it in the Greek organizations. They're doing it on athletics teams. They're doing it in the same places, in the same kinds of situations that they did it when they were in junior high and high school. It's just that colleges have the best and the brightest of the bullies now.
Yeah. Thank you very much for those words. It's absolutely great advice. And Professor Weddle, it was a pleasure having you on in Sprigeo, and we look forward to having you back on soon.